Imagine working tirelessly at your job, giving it your all, only to be fired. Not because of poor performance, not because of company downsizing, but simply because of the color of your skin. One moment, you're a loyal employee. The next, you're humiliated and thrown out like you never mattered. But what if, just 24 hours later, you walked back through those same office doors, not as an employee, but as the new owner? Sounds impossible? Well, this is exactly what happened to one man. And what he did next left everyone speechless. David Carter was the kind of employee every company dreams of. Hardworking, reliable, and always willing to go the extra mile, he had spent years building a reputation as one of the best at his job. He arrived early, stayed late, and tackled every task with precision and dedication. While others did the bare minimum, David pushed himself to exceed expectations. He wasn't just good at his job, he was exceptional. His colleagues admired him. They knew he was the one to turn to for guidance, support, or a solution when things got tough. Whenever a project was in trouble, David was the one who fixed it. His ideas brought success to the company, and his teamwork made the workplace better for everyone. Many even believed he was next in line for a promotion. But there was one person who didn't see his value: his boss, Mr. Reynolds. Unlike David's coworkers, Mr. Reynolds never praised his hard work. Instead, he found reasons to belittle him. He spoke down to him in meetings, ignored his suggestions, and took credit for his ideas. No matter how much David proved himself, it was never enough. David tried to brush it off, telling himself that hard work would eventually earn respect. But deep down, he knew the truth. Mr. Reynolds wasn't judging him based on his skills or performance. He had made up his mind about David the moment he saw him. And in Mr. Reynolds' eyes, no amount of talent, intelligence, or dedication could change that. Still, David kept his head high. He believed in himself, and he believed in fairness, but he had no idea just how unfair things were about to get. Mr. Reynolds was everything you'd expect from a bad boss: arrogant, dismissive, and full of himself. He didn't see employees as people. To him, they were just tools to use and discard. He barely spoke to them unless it was to criticize. But when it came to David, his behavior was worse. Unlike other employees, David never received praise, no matter how hard he worked. If he met a deadline, Reynolds claimed it wasn't fast enough. If he landed a big client, Reynolds took the credit. And when David spoke in meetings, Reynolds acted like he wasn't even there. The mistreatment didn't go unnoticed. David's coworkers often told him how unfair it was. Some even encouraged him to report Reynolds to higher management. But David believed in professionalism. He thought if he worked hard enough, things would change. Then one day, the inevitable happened. David was called into Reynolds' office. The atmosphere was tense. With a smug look on his face, Reynolds slid a termination letter across the desk. "David," he said coldly, "this just isn't working out." David was stunned. "But I've done everything this company has asked of me." Reynolds smirked. "It's just business." There was no real reason, no explanation, just a decision made by a man who never wanted him there in the first place. David felt like the air had been sucked from the room. He had dedicated years of his life to this company, poured his energy into making it better, and this was his reward? Fired without cause? He tried to stay calm. "Mr. Reynolds, if this is about performance, I'd like to see the records. I know I've met every target, and I've gone beyond expectations." Reynolds chuckled and leaned back in his chair. "David, let's not make this difficult. I've made my decision." David clenched his fists under the desk. He knew this wasn't about his work. This was about something deeper, something Reynolds would never admit out loud. "Just like that?" David asked, forcing himself to stay composed. "Just like that," Reynolds said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "You can pack up your things and leave today." David stood up. His heart was pounding, but he refused to let Reynolds see his pain. "One day, you're going to regret this." Reynolds laughed. I doubt that. As David walked out of the office, his coworkers looked at him in shock. Some whispered words of support, others shook their heads in frustration. They all knew he didn't deserve this. Packing up his desk was the hardest part. Every item he picked up reminded him of the years he had given to the company. He had believed in fairness, but fairness had never believed in him. As he walked out of the building for what he thought was the last time, one thought kept repeating in his mind. This isn't over. David sat in his car, staring at the company building. The pain of betrayal was real, but so was something else: determination. He had worked too hard to be treated this way. And little did Reynolds know, David had a secret weapon. David wasn't just a regular employee. What most people didn't know was that he came from a wealthy family. His father had built a successful business empire, and while David never flaunted his background, he had learned valuable lessons about leadership, business, and investments. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Dad, I need some advice." His father listened patiently as David explained what happened. Then, after a moment of silence, his father said something that changed everything. "Son, I think it's time you stop working for people like Reynolds. It's time you start owning companies like his." That night, David did his research. He knew the company had been struggling financially. They had lost major clients, and their investors were pulling back. If someone made the right move, they could take control. And that's exactly what David did. With his father's connections and his own business acumen, David worked through the night. By morning, he had set up a deal that would change everything. The next day, David walked into the building, but this time he wasn't an employee. He was the new owner. When he entered, employees froze. They had seen him leave humiliated just hours ago. How was he back? And why did he look so confident? Word spread quickly. People whispered, trying to understand what was happening. Then the announcement came. The company had been bought overnight. And the new boss? David Carter. Reynolds sat in his office sipping coffee, completely unaware. When the door swung open, he looked up and nearly dropped his cup. "David?" he stammered. David smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds." Reynolds looked around, confused. "What are you doing here? You don't work here anymore." David stepped closer. "You're right. I don't work here. I own here." Reynolds turned pale. "That's not possible." David placed a folder on the desk. "These are the documents. I just bought the company." Reynolds flipped through the papers, his hands shaking. It was all legal. It was real. David crossed his arms. "And now, it's time for some changes." The entire office gathered in the main hall as David made his first official announcement as the new owner. He stood tall, calm, and collected. "I want to thank all of you for your hard work. This company has great employees, but leadership matters." His eyes locked onto Reynolds. Effective immediately, Mr. Reynolds is relieved of his duties. The room went silent. Then, cheers. Reynolds stammered, trying to argue. You can't do this." David raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I can, and I just did." Reynolds turned red with rage. "You think you're better than me?" David smirked. "No, I just treat people better than you." With security escorting Reynolds out, the employees erupted into applause. They had watched David suffer under Reynolds for years. Seeing justice served was the best moment of their careers. David took a deep breath. He wasn't just proving a point. He was creating a workplace where everyone was respected. As the news spread, people called David a hero. But for him, it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. This story isn't just about one man. It's a lesson for everyone. Never underestimate people. Never assume someone is powerless because of their background. And most importantly, treat everyone with respect. Because in the end, the person you look down on today might be the one in charge tomorrow. And when that day comes, you better hope they treat you better than you treated them.